Hi, welcome back to this training course on how to develop and implement a fundraising strategy for marine protected areas. My name is Ludwig Liag and I will introduce you to some innovative financing mechanisms. The first financing mechanism I'm going to introduce here is the concept of payment for ecosystem services, or PES. Marine and coastal ecosystems provide numerous resources and services for people. Marine ecosystem services can be grouped into four categories: provisioning marine services, which produce tangible goods such as fisheries, marine energies, or genetic resources; also regulating services that help moderate Earth's natural phenomena, such as carbon sequestration and weather regulation; also supporting services that sustain services creating conditions necessary for the provision of all other ecosystem services, such as photosynthesis; and cultural marine services, which create benefits for human recreation, tourism, or education. Payment for ecosystem services is commonly defined as a voluntary transaction where a well-defined ecosystem service is being bought by a minimum of one ecosystem service buyer from a minimum of one ecosystem service provider, if and only if the ecosystem service provider secures the ecosystem service provision. In other words, PES can be simply explained using the following MAVA definition: pay or compensate individuals and communities to adopt new or modify existing behavior in ways that maintain or increase the health and performance of ecosystem services. PES implies that the beneficiaries of environmental services reward those whose lands provide these services. In the context of marine and coastal ecosystems, PES can be a good incentive for local communities, fishers, or companies to sustainably manage the resource, but it can also become a source of funding for marine protected areas managers. Here is an example of a PES scheme where ecosystem services buyers, such as citizens or the tourism sector, compensate land managers and owners for their sustainable management of ecosystems, providing these services. The first example of payments for ecosystem services schemes that we wanted to present to you is the one of the National Forestry Financing Fund, or FONAFIFO, in Costa Rica. Even if it is a forestry example, we found it really interesting because it's a successful PES case study that has proven to be a really good scheme in the practice. Created in 1996, the FONAFIFO's objective is to finance small and medium-sized farmers and landowners to promote sustainable practices such as forest plantations, reforestation, and agroforestry. The fund recognizes four ecosystem services which are registered in the forestry law of Costa Rica, which are water protection, landscape beauty, biodiversity conservation, and greenhouse gases mitigation. The FONAFIFO's main sources of funding include a government tax, such as tax on oil, but also a water tariff, corporate partnerships, or also individually purchased environmental services certificates. Established in 1992, the Shumbe Island Coral Park is the world's first private marine protected area. It is a not-for-profit organization, but it has commercial activities. Indeed, the MPA is financed by ecotourism revenues. Guests pay to enjoy ecosystem services such as landscape, beauty, and biodiversity, and the MPA ensures conservation and restoration activities. Another interesting PES example is the Mikoko Pamoja initiative, that is a community-based mangrove conservation and restoration project located in Gazi Bay, southern Kenya. It is the first project in the world to have successfully sold carbon credits from the preservation of mangroves. The project aims to conserve more than 100 hectares, and it will generate $12,000 per year and benefit more than 5,000 residents. The project is certified by Plan Vivo Foundation, which is an international NGO supporting smallholders and communities in their carbon projects. The carbon credits buyers include businesses, NGOs, as well as individuals. Now, let's explore some financing opportunities from the private sector, starting with opportunities related to corporate social responsibility partnerships. In simple terms, corporate social responsibility, or CSR, is the application of the principles of sustainable development to companies. In other words, it means that companies take into account the social and environmental impacts of their activities. From this perspective, the creation of partnerships with companies concerned with reducing or offsetting their environmental impacts may be an interesting opportunity to explore for marine protected areas. These partnerships can take the form of a dedicated platform through which committed companies can provide financial support for environmental projects aligned with their CSR targets and strategy. Examples of such partnerships already exist in the Mediterranean region, in Tunisia and Morocco for forests and ecosystems, respectively through the Pact for a Green Tunisia and the Partnership for Moroccan Forests. Banks represent an opportunity, particularly through the implementation of green bank cards, part of whose user fees or interbank commissions, generally without consequences for the user, can be allocated to projects for sustainable development. Examples exist already with the Green Bank Card of Crédit Agricole du Maroc in Morocco, which allocates the amounts collected via the cards for projects carried out by the High Commissariat for Water and Forestry. It represents close to 50,000 euros per year. In Costa Rica, also we have a similar scheme where the National Bank of Costa Rica has set up a green bank card system that contributes to the National Biodiversity Fund capitalization, FUNBAM. Another interesting example is the one of the French neobank Only One, whose model is based on the financing of activities with a positive impact, including projects to protect biodiversity. The final part of this module will explore funding opportunities related to conservation trust funds and impact funds. Conservation trust funds can be defined as private, legally independent institutions that provide sustainable grant funding for biodiversity conservation. They often finance part of the long-term management costs of a country's protected area system, as well as conservation and sustainable development initiatives outside protected areas. Considering their success in attracting international funding, CTF's conservation trust funds have grown significantly over the past decade, with approximately 40 new funds created. Today, more than 100 CTFs are operational, and over $2 billion USD were disbursed by CTFs in the world between 2009 and 2018. The most common funding sources of CTFs were multilateral and bilateral cooperation funding, national governments funding, international NGOs, and private foundations resources. The last decade has been a turning point in that the topic of marine and coastal ecosystems has become increasingly important. As such, the Blue Action Fund is a CTF of global scope that was launched at the 2017 UN Ocean Conference. On the Mediterranean scale, as we saw in Module 3, the Med Fund was launched in 2015 to fund Mediterranean protected areas. Finally, let's explore impact investments opportunities for MPAs, starting by a definition. The Global Impact Investing Network, GIIN, defines impact investments as investments made with the intention to generate positive, measurable social and environmental impact alongside a financial return. The GIIN identifies 4 core characteristics for impact investing. First, intentionality. Impact investments promote environmental and social solutions on a voluntary basis. Secondly, financial returns. Impact investments aim to produce financial performance and seek a return on investments. Third, range of asset classes. Impact investments can involve broad asset classes, including stocks, loans, bonds, etc. Impact measurement, finally. Impact investments must be accompanied by reporting practices to show investors the positive impacts of their investments on the environment as well as society. Impact investing is a rapidly growing market. According to the GIIN, the 2020 size of the market was estimated at more than $700 billion US. While environmental benefits are significant impacts sought by this type of investments, marine ecosystems conservation did not attract funding as quickly as the rest of the impact investment market, and this is due in particular to a lack of opportunities in investment-ready projects. However, several opportunities for impact funds for the conservation of marine ecosystems are developing. These opportunities include two IUCN initiatives: the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility, which supports the development of investable blue natural capital projects with clear ecosystem service benefits, and the Blue Carbon Accelerator Fund, which supports the development of blue carbon restoration and conservation projects in developing countries. Another marine ecosystems impact fund example is the Sustainable Ocean Fund of the asset manager Mirova. The fund supports a diversified portfolio of sustainable companies whose businesses focus on seafood, circular economy, and conservation. We will conclude this overview of innovative financing options for NPAs with a quick look at self-financing mechanisms. Self-financing mechanisms are funding sources that can allow NPAs to finance their costs from their own funding sources, generally through a mechanism linked to fees. Setting up a mechanism for collecting visitor fees, for example, payment for services such as ecological moorings or concession fees requires a full training. For a quick introduction on this concept and tools, we invite you to watch the video linked on this screen, which you will also find on medpan.org among the resources of the training Business Planning for Mediterranean NPAs. Thank you very much for your attention. Following this video tutorial, we kindly ask you to complete the assessment for Module 6, which you will find on medpan.org. This short test will allow you to check your understanding of the topics covered in this module. Also note that you will find all the resources mentioned in this tutorial, as well as additional useful resources in the training manual. Goodbye to all. See you in the next video of this training.